We all want to get to the important stuff, right?
Yeah.
Cut through all the noise and just understand what really matters.
Yeah, but it feels like there's just so much information out there these days.
Exactly. It feels like you need a PhD just to scratch the surface sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we come in. Welcome to the deep dive. Think of us as your express lane to being in the know.
We take the core research, the findings, and deliver the key insights, basically,
Yeah.
minus all the endless wading through papers.
It's about smart learning, really. We sift through the details to pull out what's crucial and, connect the dots for you.
Exactly.
And today, we're diving deep into the history of life on Earth, specifically the early Jurassic period.
Yep, based on some really fascinating scientific papers you shared.
Our focus, a dinosaur with a pretty intriguing name, Bagualia.
Right. And these papers, they really dig into the discovery of Bagualia.
Yeah.
Its unique physical features, its place in the dinosaur family tree,
And the world it lived in, too, right?
and the ancient world it inhabited, yeah.
Absolutely. So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to understand what this dinosaur, Bagualia, tells us about the early story of those huge plant eaters, the sauropods.
And the environment that shaped them, yeah.
Okay, so this wild horse of the dawn, Bagualia alba, where exactly did paleontologists first find it?
Okay, so the story starts in Argentina, down in the Chubut province, specifically in a place called Bagual Canyon.
Bagual Canyon.
That's where the first fossils turned up. And it directly inspired the first part of the name, Bagual. It's a local Spanish word for a wild horse.
Ah, okay, so the name literally comes from the place.
Exactly. Connects it right to where it was found.
Wild horse territory. I like that. It paints a picture. And the second part, alba, what's that about?
Alba is also Spanish. It means dawn.
Dawn.
And that part's really key because it points to Baguali's position as, well, one of the earliest known members of the eusauropods.
Eusauropods. Remind me, those are the sort of true sauropods.
Yeah, think of them as the more advanced group within the sauropods overall. The lineage that eventually led to those truly gigantic ones like Brachiosaurus and Argentinosaurus.
Gotcha.
So Bagualia represents a kind of dawn for this major dinosaur group.
So literally a wild horse of the dawn. That's actually a brilliant name. Lots of meaning packed in there.
It really is.
So when did this dinosaurian dawn actually break for the scientists? When were the fossils found?
The discoveries happened during digs led by the Museo Paleontologico Egidio Ferrulio back in 2007 and 2009.
Okay.
The specific spot was about 4 kilometers from a landmark called Cerro Condor within these geological layers known as the Cañadón Asfalto Formation.
Cañadón Asfalto Formation. And what was the site like? What kind of rock were these bones actually in?
Okay, picture a dark, gray, really fine-grained rock. Geologists call it a palitic matrix.
Paleolithic matrix.
Right, and this layer was full of ancient organic matter, which tells us it formed as bottom of a lake, a lacustrine environment.
An ancient lake bed.
Precisely. And what's really cool is that they've dated this layer very accurately to around 179 million years ago.
Wow, that's specific.
Yeah, Middle Tortian age, early Jurassic, and get this, it's sitting right underneath a layer of basalt. Volcanic rock.
Ah, volcanoes again. Always seems to be volcanoes nearby with dinosaurs.
It's a common theme, especially in certain periods. Tells you the environment was pretty active geologically.
So in this old, organic-rich lake mud, what did they actually pull out? Was it just like a single tooth or something?
Oh, much more than that, thankfully. The most important find is what we call the holotype specimen.
The reference point, yeah.
Exactly, the gold standard for the species.
Yeah.
MPEF-PV3301 includes a partial skull plus some neck vertebrae.
Okay, a skull and neck. That's pretty good already.
It is. But they also found a lot more material. Bones from the neck, the back, the tail, bits of the limbs, the hip girdle, shoulder girdle,
Wow.
and even more skull fragments and teeth. All told, these fossils represent at least 3 different individual Bagualia.
3 individuals. So you can get a sense of variation, maybe?
Potentially, yes. And it just gives us a much more complete picture of the animal overall, not just relying on one potentially odd individual.
That's fantastic. So a really solid amount of evidence to work with. Must have been huge for understanding this time period.
Absolutely, a major find.
Okay, so we've got the where and the when. Now, let's talk about where Bagualia fits in the grand scheme of things. You said it's an early eusauropod. Let's dig into that classification a bit more.
Right, so scientifically, Bagualia alba is placed within Eusauropoda.
The true sauropods.
Exactly. That big branch on the sauropod family tree that includes, all the later, more advanced giants,
Yeah.
Your Blodicus, Patasaurus, Brontosaurus, all those guys.
Okay.
What makes Bagualia so important is that currently it's the oldest definitive member of this group that we've found.
The oldest definitive one. That sounds important.
It really is. And because the remains are relatively complete, especially compared to some other early sauropods, it's like a Rosetta Stone for understanding how this major group got started, how they evolved from their earlier ancestors.
Okay, so its age, around 179 million years old. That's key evidence.
Crucial evidence. It points to a period of really rapid evolution, a diversification burst within the eusauropods.
A burst. Why then?
Well, it seems to have happened right after a major global warming event in the early Jurassic.
Ah, climate change.
Yes. And this warming might have actually caused the extinction of some of the, let's say, more primitive types of sauropodomorphs, the ancestors and early cousins of sauropods.
So it cleared the stage, in a way.
Kind of like that, yeah. It opened up ecological space, and eusauropods like Bagualia were apparently well-suited to step in, thrive, and diversify.
So Bagualia isn't just old, it's showing us when and maybe why the lineage leading to the true giants really took off.
Precisely, right after a major environmental shakeup.
A dinosaurian reset button, almost.
That's a pretty good analogy, and it's backed up by the phylogenetic studies,
Yeah.
the analyses of evolutionary relationships.
Right, the family trees.
Yeah. Work published in 2020, 2021, and just recently in 2024, they all consistently group Bagualia closely with other early sauropods, like Nebulosaurus, Patagosaurus, and Spinophosaurus.
Okay, so it has some known relatives from around that time.
Exactly. The cladogram, the tree diagram, in that 2024 Gomez paper really shows this cluster quite clearly.
Okay, so Bagualia, early important player in the Eusauropod story, part of this initial burst. We got its evolutionary neighborhood sorted. Now let's get to the nitty-gritty. What did this thing actually look like? Its physical features.
Right. Well, based on the bones, Bagualia was definitely a large animal.
How large are we talking? Like Brontosaurus large?
Probably not that enormous, not like the later giants from the late Jurassic or Cretaceous, but still significantly big for its time. And this increase in size among these early sauropods, it's thought to be linked to those ecosystem shifts and climate changes we mentioned, driven in part by all that volcanic activity.
So the volcanoes didn't just clear the field, they might have actually helped fuel the growth spurt.
That's one interpretation, yeah. Changes in plant life, atmospheric CO2, it's all interconnected.
Fascinating. Okay, let's start at the head. The skull. What secrets does Bagualia's skull hold?
The skull's really informative, partly because it's fairly well preserved. The premaxilla, that's the bone right at the tip of the snout, the upper jaw.
Got it.
It's pretty robust, tall, kind of flattened side to side, smooth surface. Unlike some other early relatives, it doesn't have a sort of step on its front edge.
Okay.
But what's really unique to Bagualia is this sort of beak-like process, a projection, at its lower front corner.
A beak on a sauropod.
Well, beak-like bone. The scientists studying it think it might have supported a pretty substantial keratinous beak, like you see on turtles or some birds.
Wow. That changes the mental picture quite a bit, not just a blunt nose munching leaves.
Exactly. It suggests some specialized feeding, even this early on, maybe cropping vegetation in a particular way. Evolution's always experimenting.
That's really cool. Okay, what about the rest of the upper jaw?
Moving back, you've got the maxilla, the main upper jawbone. In Bagualia, it shows signs of having 13 tooth sockets, 13 alveoli.
13 teeth on each side up top.
Roughly, yes. It had a strong connection to that premaxilla at the front and a deep pit, the narial fossa, related to the nostril opening. We can also see how it connected to the cheekbone, the jugal, and the palatine bone in the roof of the mouth.
So lots of intricate connections holding it all together. What about other skull bones, like around the eye?
Right. The nasal bone, over the snout, contacted the frontal bone, the forehead, broadly. The lacrimal, in front of the eye socket, was sturdy and tall, connecting clearly to the jugal, maxilla, prefrontal, and nasal. A pattern kind of like later sauropods, actually, like Camarasaurus.
Interesting parallel.
Yeah. The prefrontal itself is sort of long and triangular in section. The postorbital, behind the eye, formed the back rim of the socket and had a slender piece pointing down, which is common in these early sauropodomorphs.
Okay.
And the squamosals, way at the back corners of the skull, were robust, with 4 main projections linking to other bones, giving the back of the skull a bit of an S shape from the side.
So looking at the whole skull, it's a mix. Some older features, some newer ones.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of a transitional form. You can see features linking it back to earlier ancestors,
Hmm.
but also clear signs pointing towards the classic sauropod skull structure, right on the cusp.
A skull in transition. I like that. Okay, inside the skull, the brain case, what does that tell us?
The brain case itself, the part enclosing the brain, is almost complete and nicely ossified, fused up.
Solid structure.
Very solid, robust, tall, which is typical for eusauropods. But interestingly, it doesn't show much evidence of pneumaticity, those air sacs or spaces inside the bone that became really common in the skulls of later, much larger sauropods.
Ah, so maybe not as much weight saving needed yet?
Perhaps, or the system just hadn't evolved to that extent yet. The foramen magnum, the big hole at the back where the spinal cord connects,
Yeah.
it was elliptical, sort of oval-shaped and pointed downwards, different from the more circular shape in many non-sauropod sauropodomorphs. And a specific bit at the back, the paracipitал process, had a unique shape that helps distinguish Bagualia.
Okay, lots of details differentiating it. Now, teeth. You mentioned spoon-shaped teeth. What were they like, and what does that suggest about its diet?
Right, the teeth are key. First, the lower jaws, the dentaries, they form a U shape when you look down on them.
U-shape, characteristic of eusauropods.
Yes, very typical. The right lower jaw had 16 tooth sockets, the left had 14. And they even found some teeth that were still erupting, pushing their way out.
Oh, neat. Like baby teeth coming in?
Sort of, yeah. Tooth replacement was ongoing, like in most reptiles. The sockets were deep, suggesting strong roots. And another jawbone, the pharyngular, had a big projection called the coronoid process for muscle attachment. Strong jaw muscles.
Makes sense for a big plant eater. And the teeth themselves.
Yep, definitely spoon-shaped. The enamel, the outer layer, was heavily wrinkled, and the edges were asymmetrical. The inner side was sort of bulging, convex, while the outer side was more concave.
Wrinkled spoons.
And they leaned forward slightly in the jaw, procumbent. This whole package spoon shape, wrinkled enamel, asymmetry is very characteristic of these early eusauropods and suggests they were adapted for stripping leaves or maybe bulk browsing tougher vegetation.
Okay.
What's also interesting are these numerous tiny pores found on the outer surface of the lower jaw, near the tooth row, and the fact that the very first erupted tooth showed hardly anywhere.
What could that mean?
Well, one idea is that maybe there was some kind of fleshy covering or even a keratinous sheath around the front of the jaws or lips, possibly protecting the teeth during feeding, or maybe involved in food gathering. The pores might relate to blood supply for that tissue.
Built-in lip guards, maybe? That's fascinating. Okay, skull and teeth point to a large herbivore, adapted for certain plants with some unique features. Let's move down the body. The backbone and ribs, the axial skeleton. What was the neck like?
The neck vertebrae, the cervicals, were opistheholous. Opistheholous, fancy term meaning the front end of the vertebral body, the centrum, is convex, ball-shaped, and the back end is concave, socket-shaped.
Ah, like a ball and socket joint between vertebrae.
Exactly. Allows for good flexibility, but also stability. Think of stacking spoons, kind of.
Yeah.
The centra themselves were elongated, making for a long neck, and they had a keel, a ridge running along the bottom.
Okay. What about the very top connecting to the skull?
There's a small bone called the protlus right at the top, which was robust and diamond-shaped in Bagualia. The atlas, the first actual neck vertebra, had long bony projections sticking out. And the axis, the second vertebra, it had deep pits on its sides and a prominent upper part, the neural arch. Based on how fused some parts of the axis were, or weren't, the researchers think the main specimen, the holotype, was probably a subadult.
Not fully grown yet. Interesting. So we're seeing an earlier stage of development.
Potentially, yeah. It gives us insights into how they grew.
And the neck ribs, were they big and bulky?
They had a complex shape where they attached to the vertebrae 4 main points of contact. Technical names are tuberculum, capitulum, and an anterior process. This suggests complex muscle attachments. But the main shaft of the rib was long, slender, and pointed backwards along the neck.
Ah, like in most sauropods, helping to stiffen the neck base.
Likely part of that, yeah. Providing support and anchor points for muscles.
Okay, moving down the spine to the back vertebrae, the dorsals, how did they differ from the neck ones?
The dorsals, the ones in the trunk, generally had more developed features for stability. The zygapophyses, those little interlocking joints between vertebrae, were larger. They also had bigger bony projections for muscle attachment, the apophyses, and more complex thin sheets of bone called laminae, probably also for muscle anchoring and maybe some weight reduction.
So a more robust, complex structure in the back.
Definitely. And a key change you see along the back is The position of the periaphyses is where the upper head of the rib attaches. They start low on the centrum in the front dorsals and gradually move up onto the neural arch further back.
A standard sauropod feature, right?
A very standard feature, yeah. Unfortunately, the actual dorsal ribs found with Bagualia are pretty fragmented.
Ah, shame. Common problem, I guess. What about the hips and tail? The pelvic girdle and caudal vertebrae?
The hip structure, the pelvic girdle, was found a bit squashed and jumbled. The sacrum, that's the vertebrae fused to the hips, was made of 5 vertebrae. Their ribs were fused, but maybe not all completely or in the same way.
Some variation there.
A little bit, yeah. The neural spines on top of the sacrum were like flat plates fused together, and they curved backwards. Interestingly, they lacked those side pits, or fossae, that you see in some later sauropods.
Okay.
And a key point, the sacral ribs, connecting the sacrum to the main hip bones, didn't directly connect into the hip socket, the acetabulum. That's actually more like what you see in earlier non-sauropod sauropodomorphs.
Yeah.
Another transitional feature.
Still holding on to some older characteristics in the hips. Fascinating. And the tail.
The tail vertebrae, the caudals, changed quite a bit along their length. Near the hips, they were concave on both ends, and pocolus, and had well-developed transverse processes sticking out sideways.
Or tail muscles.
Right. The middle tail vertebrae got longer relative to their height, and had clear spots for attaching the hemal arches, those V-shaped bones underneath.
Chevron bones, sometimes called.
Exactly, chevrons. Towards the tip, the vertebrae became much longer than tall, lost those side processes and pits, and the neural spines on top became less angled. So you had a strong, muscular base and probably a more flexible whip-like end.
A dynamic structure. And those hemelarches, the chevrons. Anything special about them?
They had a canal running through them for nerves and blood vessels, about 20% of their total height. They had concave sides, long downward blades, and a central ridge. Pretty standard sauropod stuff. They did tend to get shorter and thicker further down the tail.
Okay, we've built the spine. Now, the limbs, the appendicular skeleton. What do the arms and legs tell us about how Bagualia moved?
Right, the shoulder girdle gives us clues. It had a well-developed acromion process, a projection on the shoulder blade for muscle attachment, and a deep fossa, or pit, nearby, also for muscle.
Strong shoulder muscles.
Seems like it. And the humerus, the upper arm bone, was quite straight and had a relatively low delta pectoral crest. That's the ridge where the big chest muscles attach.
What does that combination mean? Straight humerus, low crest?
Taken together, these features strongly point towards Bagualia being an obligate quadruped. It had to walk on all fours. And it was graviportal.
Graviportal built for carrying weight.
Exactly. Built to support a large body mass. And supporting that, both the humerus and the femur, the thigh bone, show increased eccentricity in cross-section.
Eccentricity, meaning?
Meaning they weren't perfectly circular in cross-section. They were more oval or flattened in one direction, which makes the bones stronger against bending forces from a particular direction in this case, likely front-to-back bending during walking.
Ah, clever engineering by evolution. Stiffer bones for a heavy animal.
Precisely.
What about the lower leg and ankle? Any adaptations there?
Yes. The tibia, the main shin bone, had a prominent tenemial crest sticking out forwards and sideways. That crest acts like a lever for muscles that extend the lower leg.
More powerful leg action.
Seems so. And the astragalus, a key ankle bone connecting to the tibia, was wedge-shaped. These features, the canemial crest, the wedge-shaped astragalus, are seen as refinements for locomotion in a large four-legged animal, a step towards the really massive pillar-like legs of later giants.
So even in the limbs of this early eusauropod, we're seeing the foundations being laid for those later supergiants.
Absolutely. The blueprint is starting to emerge.
Okay, we've got a pretty good picture of Bagualia the animal now. Let's zoom back out to its world. You mentioned volcanoes and ancient lake. What was the overall paleo environment like based on the rocks it was found in?
Right. The geology of that specific layer, the Chacritas member, the Cañadón Asfalto Formation, tells a fascinating story. The chemistry suggests the lake itself was hypersaline and alkaline.
Salty and alkaline, like...
Think of modern soda lakes like Lake Magadi in Kenya. Pretty harsh conditions, chemically speaking.
Wow. Not your average swimming hole.
Definitely not. And the wider environment seems to have been heavily influenced by the volcanic activity of the massive Chonaic province nearby. Maybe something like the Waimangu volcanic rift valley in New Zealand today, or parts of the volcanic fields in California, hot springs, geothermal activity, that sort of thing.
A pretty dramatic landscape. Volcanoes, weird lakes. What did that mean for Bagualia's lifestyle and diet?
Well, that robust skull and those broad, spoon-shaped, wrinkly teeth really click into place here. These strongly suggest Bagualia was a bulk browser, eating large amounts of pretty tough vegetation,
And the dominant plants then?
or conifers. Things like Araucariaceae, related to modern monkey puzzle trees, and Norfolk Island pines. Chiropodiaceae and Cupressaceae, the cypress family, these are likely the main food source.
Tough coniferous diet.
Seems so. And this ability to process fibrous plant material might have been key to its success, especially after that torsion oceanic anoxic event we talked about.
The environmental disruption.
Right. Maybe other herbivores couldn't handle this tougher vegetation that possibly became more dominant, giving Bagualia and its relatives an edge. They could exploit a changing resource base.
So a tough dinosaur for a tough world, eating tough plants. Makes sense. What about that long neck again? Just for reaching high branches?
That was likely part of it, yes.
Yeah.
Reaching food others couldn't. But there's another hypothesis. Thermoregulation.
Cooling off.
Possibly. A long neck has a large surface area. It could have helped radiate excess body heat, kind of like how big elephant ears work.
Yeah.
Especially important for a large animal potentially living in a volcanically warmed environment.
Dinosaur air conditioning. That's a neat idea. Were other fossils found there? Did Bagualia have neighbors?
Oh, yes. The site wasn't just Bagualia. They've found fossils of various types of those conifers I mentioned, confirming the food source.
Okay.
They also found turtle fossils, and significantly, teeth from at least 4 different kinds of theropod dinosaurs.
The meat eaters. So Bagualia wasn't necessarily at the top of the food chain?
Probably not as an adult, but certainly younger ones might have been prey. It tells us Bagualia was part of a complex and diverse ecosystem, even in this quite challenging early Jurassic environment.
So it wasn't alone in this volcanic lakeside world, a whole community. This has been fascinating, really piecing together not just the dinosaur, but its whole world.
It really brings it to life, doesn't it? Bagualia is so important because as that oldest definitive eusauropod, it gives us this crucial snapshot of the very beginnings of these giants.
And right at a time of major environmental change.
Exactly. It forces us to think about how evolution responds to pressure, how new groups arise when conditions shift. It wasn't a slow, gradual process necessarily. There might have been these rapid bursts linked to events like volcanism and climate change.
It's incredible how interconnected it all is. The rocks, the climate, the evolution of these amazing animals. Bagualia isn't just an old fossil. It feels like a key character in this huge planetary drama.
Well said. It really highlights the dynamism of Earth's history.
So wrapping this up, what's a big takeaway for you from this deep dive into Bagualia?
For me, it really underscores the adaptability of life. Here's this animal thriving, diversifying, getting big during a time of pretty significant environmental stress. It makes you wonder, what lessons are there for us about resilience, about adaptation in the face of the major global changes happening today?
That's a really powerful thought to carry away. Hits close to home. Or maybe thinking evolutionarily. If Bagualia was one of the first big experiments in sauropod giantism, what pushed things even further? What pressures led to the truly mind-boggling sizes we see later in the Jurassic and Cretaceous?
Right. Was it an arms race with predators, changes in plant nutrients, just the physics of being big? So many questions still.
It definitely sparks the imagination about what other discoveries are out there waiting to fill in more pieces of this incredible story.
Absolutely. There's always more to find.
Well, thanks for guiding us through the world of Bagualia. It's been fantastic.
My pleasure. It's an amazing creature.
And for everyone listening, keep asking those questions. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.